You're live.
All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Tuesday, October 12th, 2021 work study meeting. If we could all stand and rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, Annie, can we have a roll call? Director Asner?
Yes.
Director Byers?
Here.
Director Faulkner?
Here.
Director Hudson?
Here.
Director Moeller?
Here.
Vice President Petroff? Here. President Cuneo?
Here.
Perfect, so we have four. So first on our agenda today, for agenda 2.11, is the progress update on the 5-year equity plan.
All right, we have Dr. Macklin and Dr. Gold here to update the board on our 5-year equity plan.
Good evening, Vice President Podcast, Board of Directors, Subpoenas. My name is Molly Bolton. I am the Executive Director of Teaching Learning and Accountability.
Dr. Michael Macklin, Director of Equity.
And tonight we're going to present to you the 5-year equity plan update along with a draft of our professional learning plan for equity. So the purpose of this presentation is just to kind of update you on where we are, share our progress from last year, from the time the equity framework was approved, and then the work we've been doing thus far this year.
Great, and if we recall last year on April 26th when the framework was approved, we called that a living live document, and we'll come back with updated actions regarding those key pieces of the equity framework. And so a couple of actions have been completed there. Policy review and recommendations have been completed, which means that policy and regulations were reviewed through the lens of equity with recommendations given for those key pieces. Also, now myself, Dr. Macklin, I serve as a standing member of the policy committee as it relates to those equity and regulations. And that's important because providing the lens of equity is essential, especially to identify and eliminate potential barriers. And so a lot of times we ask ourselves the question when you're looking through the lens of equity is who does the policy most affect and who is left out? And then you also look to make sure that equity is intentional rather than accidental. Also, when we talk about actions that are completed, it's really the school equity team. So that's also a big piece of ensuring that there is equity interwoven throughout the district and permeates throughout the district. And so as we review here and take a look at just a couple of our SSD schools plans, Ackerman focuses on equity and restorative practices, really those two key pieces. Their theme and their goal is already restorative practices, but then how equity integrates to that and how those two key pieces serve together, such as everyone having a voice, key relationships. Bridges focuses on the relationship between trauma and zip codes. We know that a lot of times that our zip codes define trauma that the student has, and really being able to correlate that so staff can understand that and really enhance their learning as it relates to those two pieces. It's important. It's vital for staff to understand what zip code and where a student lays their head and the trauma that supports that. It helps the staff to better understand the student. And then we have JDC, which is focusing on equity and teamwork. So how that equity piece and that teamwork really enhances the staff to work together. New honor on equity and staff burnout, and really how when you talk about equity and getting each individual staff member what they need, how that also supports them when they are first facing trying times through burnout. Southview, uncovering biases. So we all know that we all have biases and what those biases look like. Biases are different than prejudice and racism, and understanding what those key pieces are and how those biases impact educators in the classroom. And then Northview, again, also with equity and restorative practices. South Tech, really that key essential piece of vocabulary and understanding and to help facilitate discussions as it relates to vocabulary, as it relates to equity and what those pieces look like. NORTEC, as the equity statement that was approved by the Board of Education last year, and how that really correlates to the work that goes on in NORTEC. And then also Litzinger, equity and restorative practices.
And Litzinger was inadvertently left off of your PowerPoint, but they are.
So one of the main key points, really focal points here, year two, as we talk about the learning plan, is really framing the framework. The framework, which is again approved by the Board of Education in April. This is year two. And so we focus on framing the framework's professional learning session. The focus is on equity as it relates to each individual job positions, guiding principles, and learning how to use those principles to facilitate discussions surrounding equity within their job or within their role. The outcome, of course, is that the entire community, SSD community, will be unified by the process, and that equity will permeate, and so that each individual in making decisions daily will become a little bit more knowledgeable. We always say that we want your worldview to become a little bit more nuanced. That means as you take a look at things and understand really what those equity key pieces are, to go from there. The next slide just gives kind of a check-in on really where we are. This is a year-long goal to accomplish this, and at this point, there have been 20 out of 40 subgroup presentations have been scheduled or completed. And staff and all the entities really appreciate being able to be included in that pieces. And those persons also include food service, custodians, maintenance, bus drivers, because it's important that when we talk about equity, that we include all. And that there is individualization in ensuring that all departments and divisions have that true understanding. As you can see, there are 94% of participants who have already taken the framework training, which is the focus for this year, has rated that this has helped experience their learning of above average or outstanding. So above average or outstanding. And 92% participants indicated that they can apply the strategies of the professional learning experiences to their work, because we want to move from theory to action. So we don't just want to sit and get, we don't just want them to clearly just to engage, but they want them to be involved. And so that 92% is a key piece. When you look at the specific statements at the bottom, probably one of the things that definitely is a highlight is that I am now aware of the inequities in my classroom and will work to achieve equity. Before you identify that you need equity, you must first identify that there are inequities. And so for a staff member to say that that's in the classroom, that's powerful. And then I've learned for inequities with our department practice school environments and how to change and promote equity for all students.
One thing I'd like to point out with the framing the framework presentation, Dr. Macklin has worked really hard to work with each one of the divisions and departments to really get to know the nuances of their particular work area, and then taking the framework and really relating it to their day-to-day jobs. And so, that's been a lot of work on his part, a lot of research, a lot of conversation. But what we've seen from these results is staff is getting it. They're understanding how equity plays into the role they play in SSD, which again, if we're going to make this systematic and systemic, those are the things we need to do.
So when we talk about also the focus for this year is really creating a process for community and family members to be an active part of decision making. One of the most concerns also is that when a family member or community member feels like they don't have a voice, or even though their voice is marginalized. And so I will work to continue that process and then to bring that process to certain stakeholders for feedback.
Next, we're looking at our leadership series. And so we have contracted with Nicole Pepper-Smith, who has done a lot of work with lesson caps and has also been affiliated with Cambio Group. And really looking at working to build our leadership team, both the directors and principals, as well as the district leadership team in those principles of equity. It is a train-the-trainer type model, and so we're very hopeful then the next year then to take that to more of the middle management, our coordinators, our assistant principals, and those leaders, to bring those principles down. You can see the series outcomes. It'll be a series of 4 task-based sessions that we'll be working with her. And each session does have individual outcomes as well. I'm more than happy to share those with you. But these are the overall outcomes of this series. And the thing that we really like about her work is she aligns it with the Universal Design for Learning principles, which is something that our district already has done a lot of work with, as that shows access for all students. So looking at how we can then take that into equity conversation.
Great, so when we talk about visions and themes as it relates to really the next 4 years, this is 2021, 2022, of course, which is really focusing on the framework. And then the next 3 years focus really on 2022 and 23, diversity and culture, and then bias, and then they can get into the action. It's important that we have a strong understanding of what these terms mean and how they correlate, and so teachers can really understand and staff can understand and have the impact. Culture is more than just a list of holidays or just food preferences. Culture is language. Culture is how we live. Culture is how we are grounded. Culture is what really has defined us. And so it's also important that we understand what biases are. What are implicit biases, what are unconscious biases, and how does that affect us truly? We all have biases, so understanding that is key. Again, when we focus on the of course, on the developing the 5-year professional learning plan, you can see really all the groups and the entities that are included there, and really how they are really defined. Those individuals here who necessarily don't have contact with students, but still need to truly understand what it means, what biases mean, what diversity, what it means to work with in a diverse environment. And then those individuals who do have contact with students. Our bus drivers are the first persons who see their students, and clearly have a strong impact. And then, of course, taking a look into focus on really our staff and then what that looks like. So you can see how that lays out and what those pieces look like.
And we do have a bigger version of that inside your document that is the draft on page 12. So I know that's kind of hard to see on the PowerPoint, but there is a bigger picture of that.
And again, the next page again is just course offerings and shows course offerings and the title, and then the audience and the timing and the format on what that looks like, and then each outcome for what those look like. And again, there is a bigger picture of that also in the draft.
This is just a sampling here. If you look in the document with the courses, this actually runs, it starts on page 13 and runs through the end of the document. So these are all the different types of courses. Again, this is just a draft. We're still working on getting stakeholder feedback on these course offerings, and we do anticipate probably some of these changing a little bit, based on our stakeholder feedback. But we wanted to bring the very early draft to you guys to kind of show where we're headed with that. So now we'll open it up for any questions you might have.
Okay. I have several, and I hope that you will entertain me in this scenario, because my questioning is very targeted to make sure that we stay focused. Okay. First of all, it's a 5-year plan. Dr. Cuneo, you think we'll be around to see this? We hope to, okay? But my 26-year-old...
Unless you know something I don't know.
For you and I,
Oh, yeah.
5 years is a considerably long time, okay? It may not be to others, but to us, we precious, we really look at our time now. So, therein lies why a 5-year instead of a 3-year, okay? And, I say that because you also talked about in here And during that same time, you know, I think about the fact that we expect children, if you talk about 5 years in public education, that's junior high to senior high. So we expect children to be able to comprehend certain things through that many grade levels in a 5-year period. So that goes back to my question that kind of came in on the focus for this year framework presentation, where you mentioned about 94% of the participants have rated the overall quality of the program in their learning experience. And we're talking about adults. So I'm assuming that you're saying that adults have a difficult time learning certain principles of life and human nature that children can pick up at a quicker period of time or a shorter period of time. Those things are questions to me, because the other thing is, are we looking at this particular equity piece? Is it a continuation of civil rights actions, or is it an economic development plan? Because if it's civil rights, then we've added another 5 years on to some 40 that we've already gone through. And, you know, these are some things that come to mind to me, because as I've shared with Dr. Macklin, you know, I'm a person who likes to see positive results accomplished. And I dare sure not want us to be able to find ourselves using excuses and not being able to accomplish the objective. But all of these, as we in turn had to define what is equity and come up with a unified interpretation of it, or a unified definition of it, that we all would work through. But even in having that, we also have to look at the time frame. And so sometimes, you know, being my age, I look at the fact that the time that we spent thus far to still be at a point to where we're trying to start another project toward accomplishing goals that we said 40 years ago that were part of what this culture of America stated that it was prepared to do. When it comes to now what we found equity, gone through diversity. And sometimes I have hesitancy, because I think that things can get in a cultural basis to be a flavor of the day. This is you know, we've gone through a period of time when everything was diversity, 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 diversity. We hired diversity people. It lasted 4 or 5 years, and it was eliminated. Now we in turn have equity individuals that we're hiring. Don't want that to be a 4 or 5 year flavor. And then all of a sudden, we gonna move on to something else, because 5 years, a whole lot of things can come into play that then puts this particular effort to the side. Well, we've got something else over here we've got to deal with. And so I commend you, of course, in all the things that you've done. I think they're fantastic, and I know that we have to have starting points. But I do have concerns when we talk about a 5-year plan. You know, in most business developments, it starts with a 3-year plan. And so to me, this is a matter of business. It's not just a social construct of civil rights, because that hasn't proven at this point. If those things had been working, we wouldn't be at this point. So I'd like to make sure that we, in fact, are cognizant of both the time, you know, and, you know, what part of this do we look at that say 75% of what we in turn have planned, we can actually say has been accomplished. And like I say, yeah, I'd love to be able to see, hopefully, in 5 years that I'm still around, to see the benefit of this particular work. You know, I'd like for us to be around, Doc. I'm sure you would too. You know, but I know that it's a great possibility, 5 years. You know, a lot of people sitting in this room may not be sitting here. And therefore, whatever the momentum that is built here may not exist because it doesn't have the same engines to stimulate the momentum. You know, but if in fact that we are able to show, see, touch, and feel in a more expedient manner, then it tends to influence any new involvement that we have within the structure of this organization. So those were a few questions that I have in reference to making sure that this just doesn't go by as just another civil rights effort gone bad, you know, and look at it for what are we really trying to accomplish. I know that we've defined the word, but I don't want us to lose sight just with that because it does become a lot more difficult, and we're dealing with adults. And if we can expect children to grasp the variations, courses that they go through from middle school to high school, then I think that we can have the same expectations of adults, if not greater.
So I think what you see, though, is a series of courses. So, and they do follow the different themes for the years. And I think the premise behind that is you keep the momentum going. One of the things we have going for us, though, is, you know, the board has adopted equity as a core value. So that, to me, ensures it's not a flavor of the month, as you say, because it should lead, those core values lead everything we do in this district. And so because we have equity as a core value, it can't go away if we're really living up to what we say our core values are. So I think we have that. But I think what you see here is keeping that momentum going. We often know if we don't keep things in front of people, that's when it kind of dissipates and the momentum gets lost. But by keeping courses and keeping that learning going continuously, that's what keeps the passion and the momentum going. And so I think that's what our premise is for this 5-year plan, is to keep it going. And then from there, determining what folks still need to learn or what folks still want to learn more about. So that it's that ongoing lifelong learning that we'll have towards that.
Sorry, go ahead. And the lifelong learning piece is key. And when you look at equity and inequities, a lot of times the terminology is lost because individuals don't grasp, see, touch, and feel. And not grasping it is where it is lost. And so ensuring that each year, the focus for each year, the task is accomplished. And again, that thought comes from, instead of doing 20 things well, let's do one thing great for that year and then be able to move forward to ensure that staff has accomplished that learning and that is permeating throughout the district.
A lot of what I hear my friend Mr. Faulkner sharing is concern about accountability, and I do have a similar concern and question in that regard. First, I applaud the effort and all the work that goes into this. I'm thinking about student outcomes and what data points or metrics you have in mind going forward to help you evaluate our success and progress, and especially when we have different types of equity plans for the different schools. They each have a slightly different focus, which I appreciate too. You know, it's not a universal, it's a customer need approach that goes on there. What are the data points that you will be using to compare success between the schools?
And definitely we can share that with you because as the schools make their plans, there are student outcomes and staff outcomes tied to those plans.
Can you give some examples of student outcomes, for instance?
So So for instance, some of them are around discipline, depending on their initiative. But I do know some of them are around discipline. And one of the things we do track in this district is lost instructional time due to security and isolation restraint, behavior incidents, losing instructional time in the office and things like that. So that's definitely a metric that we already have in place that we can look at the impact of the work that they're doing through their equity plans and see how that's impacting.
Is there more metrics than that?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I mean, there would also be, your student achievement, of course, looking at gains academically as well. So definitely we can share this with you.
I have a couple of things I was curious about. One of which is on the actions completed, on the action plan. Did each of those schools develop their own? Is that how they came about?
In collaboration with myself.
I think they're all excellent. What I would ask is there a way that we could, each of those, if we would say, get rid of the school's name, those could be important to every school. Will we develop a series of best practices or things that we have learned to be able to share with the schools that don't have that as a specific goal?
Yeah, well, and yes, so we can develop that from each school. The hope is that we build from year to year.
Yeah.
And so, right, as we build from year to year, we have that in our tool belt to be able to assist and work with leaders in schools to keep those pieces going.
Would it be possible then at the end of the year on these plans, just give us a bullet point of what was found out, the measurements that came about, and then to share what worked and what didn't work with the other schools? I mean, each one of these seem like they're approaching something that is very specific that they want done in their school. But everything in there should be done at all schools. So it would be nice if we would share what worked and what didn't work. And I'd like, as a board member, to have a bullet point.
Yeah, and then each year we're going to be updating the board, like with April and May on the progress of it. The other thing is with each one of the schools, the reason there's similarities, but there's some differences. Some schools are further along with some of the equity work that they were doing. And so that's where it's kind of a differentiation, is that some schools were trying to continue where their work was at. They were working on Cambio for the last couple of years, and that was kind of like the platform. So Dr. Macklin is really trying to make sure we're moving them forward, but other schools didn't have as much exposure or as much work that they had, in particular, with some, with the Cambio group and the groups that they were working on before. So that's why you see kind of like this continuum of, there's similarities, but there's differences because of where each school and their leadership has been bringing them. And those pieces that we're going to continue to do.
And the other thing I have is a comment, and that is, thank you, Dr. Macklin, for showing the policy committee. I find if we're going to implement something in, that's the place to do it. That then tells us the rules, the culture of this organization. I appreciate your comments and going through the policy committee with us.
Thank you.
I have one question. When does the equity 5-year plan go from draft to final?
So by the end of this year,
Okay.
and possibly sooner, I think we typically come back in March to the board. And so our goal would be to have more of a finalized plan to bring to you at that point.
Great.
But, we do want to take it through some stakeholder groups, our equity stakeholder groups, and work on getting feedback and making sure that we have courses aligned to what our stakeholders really want.
I had okay, thank you for the work you're doing. I think it's excellent. I made comments in past meetings about my concern about process versus, so I obviously, the classes are on my favor, actually, I appreciate that. I do want to go back to ask some questions about these metrics. I'm looking at pages 3 and 4. These are the guiding principles and some of the metrics that are being used. And now, a lot of these metrics are essentially they look to me like yes or no questions. In other words, examples are metrics, review process completed, duly completed. But there were a few that seemed more like really specific goals. One was the two inclusivity goals on page 4, for example, in the middle. One was a goal of increasing 2% in diversity among staff by job class. So that's a very specific concrete goal. I like those goals a lot. So the next goal was, I'm assuming it says the number of community and family members on decision-making committees. That's the metric is to know what the number is. On the following page, there was a section, this is page 5, there's a section called Equitable Support Services. With the timeline occurring between fall of 2023 and spring of 2024, in which the plan was to review the processes for identifying and providing support for individuals who require support services, with the metric being to analyze the utilization of related services across the county. So I assume that means to say, to show that it's being used, as opposed to just did we or did we not analyze it. I assume that's meaning the utilization of related services is the actual metric. That to me seems like, I'm just curious, I imagine we could probably look at that now, to have a guideline for what we're trying to achieve. Is that being done, or is this something that's really happening later? In other words, this seems to me like something that was fairly, concrete we'd be able to look at. Right.
Yeah. But then the looking at, reviewing those, that's gonna take a little bit longer.
Okay.
Yeah, but absolutely, we can pull that data right now.
So I will say that data would be, I think, interesting to me as a board member, helpful to understand, so we tie what we're doing now to specific goals for improvement. As an example.
It'd be good to have that.
And to say, here's what here's what we're doing. And I'm worried we're going to say, well, what can you do now? Which is what, I appreciate these things take time, but as Mr. Faulkner said, are there things?
Move along.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Next on the agenda,
It's that time of year, we start talking about budget, so you'll be seeing Jeff a lot over the next several months, until February or so. So it'll walk us through the process that we're doing, continue on what we learned from last year's process, and then update the board on the tweaking that we, learned from the prior.
Thank you. Good evening, President Cuneo, Vice President Petra, Board of Education, and Dr. Keenan. My name is Jeff Hogg. I'm the Chief Operations Officer, and tonight I'll present on the budget process. So this presentation will explain basically the process used to build the budget so that it can help support our staff and students. It will also provide transparency for the taxpayers of special school district to show the work and that we are good stewards of the money. And so then next slide, please, Doug. You'll see in your packet or on the screen the preliminary FY23 budget goals. These 4 goals are the same as last year. We'll review these with the budget committee as we move through this, and we will address and see if we want to adopt or change anything. Again, budget goal 1 is staffing. We'll continue to provide the staff needed to our partner districts and to our own schools so that we can continue to provide a successful education for our students. Goal 2 is that curricular support. So we'll continue to provide the best practice, most effective curricular supplies, programs, and supports for our students. Goal 3, facilities and buildings. We'll continue with the dedication for our buildings to be safe but educationally inviting for our students. And then goal 4, as we just talked about, equity. Every student, regardless of learning ability or socioeconomic status, has access to the services they need to succeed. So you'll see on the next slide, the major budget assumptions. We talk about that as we get further into the budget. I just want to make you aware that we'll start producing those probably December or January. And that's kind of the guidelines of what revenue will look like, maybe where expenditures will fall, where the state of the state revenue is along those lines. So that'll start about December or January. And so then on the next slide, you'll see SSD equities core value, which again was just presented really, really well by the group previous to me. Every student, regardless of learning ability or socioeconomic status, deserves access to the services they need to succeed. And then on page 6, you'll see the Distressed Community Index. And we talked about this last year, we introduced this. You'll see the communities in that orange or red are at a higher risk, at risk or distressed communities, where the communities in blue are prosperous, comfortable, kind of in that mid-tier range. And so we'll continue to talk about this as we get into the tiers of how we look at our budget. And so that's where you see the focus on all, focus on some, the focus on few. We basically use this zero-based budgeting approach to not only look at what everyone needs, but also to assess what districts in some of those distressed communities may need as well. And so on slide 8, you'll see tier 1, and that's all schools. So that's where we've developed a framework to support all districts across the county, where the equitable resources will be provided. We ensure that all schools have the staffing supports, the curricular supports, the safety measures to meet the needs of all our students. And then you'll see tier 2 on page 9 or slide 9. And this is some schools. This is where the disproportionality term comes in. And you'll see that in the 11 school districts that we serve with disproportionality. Ferguson, Florissant, Hazelwood, Jennings, Kirkwood, Melville, Normandy, Parkway, Rittner, Rockwood, Riverview, and New City. And again, that is a focus on additional supports on the areas identified for each school. And really what it looks like is an emphasis on social and emotional learning, and then interventions for literacy and numeracy. And then tier 3, and this is the few schools that we focus on, and it's really understanding the inequities in the school and the historical underrepresented, underserved, or marginalized groups. We do that by looking at mobility rates, trauma rates, rates of special education identification, proficiency in reading and math, poverty, and then again, that marginalized group. And this is the area where we work with districts and use their data to really support what they need individually. And that could look like, interventions in math and reading, or it could look like, another social worker or some more teachers, more parents. But that's really where you get into those conversations with those school districts to see what would best serve them. And so then this brings us to zero-based budgeting, and this is how we go about deciding or building that budget. So again, that's a methodology that really helps organizations align to the strategic goals. And you can do that because you set your goals, and then you build your budget to support that. Too many times we have a budget, and we say, you get X amount of dollars, and then whatever programs schools can fit in, they fit in. With zero-based, you really identify what you need, and then you build your budget around that. And so, again, it aligns to the strategic goals as opposed to you align to the budget. And as we do this, we'll provide worksheets to our principals and our directors and our partner directors. And really what it comes down to are 3 things: needs, wants, and enhancements. And the needs is basically what you need to support your curriculum at a very basic level. Your wants are what you're doing right now to continue your robust curriculum or to continue your curriculum at the current level. And then your enhancements are what could make that better. So really, I'll give you an example here. Needs would be you have a curriculum, you buy a textbook to support that. And so you can support that curriculum with that basic textbook. What we do now, though, is we have a textbook, but we've also bought manipulatives, and we've also purchased an online program. And so that's what we would need to keep that program at that level. And so that's your wants, and then your enhancements is maybe we bring in a speaker, or maybe we take the kids on a field trip. That is one of those things where you've identified that it would really enhance the class for the student. However, maybe we can fit that in the budget, maybe we can't, but at least we're guaranteed to continue providing where we're at right now, which is a really good, robust level. And so as we move into this budget process, what we'll provide for the principals or the directors or the administrators is 2 years of historical data and a current year to date. So they'll be able to see how they spent over the prior 2 years or how their predecessors spent over the prior 2 years. And then they'll be able to see what they budgeted for this year and really get a gauge. We'll determine a baseline for staff to see if we need to add or if we need to reduce depending on staff sizes or numbers. And then Toby Clodfelter has already started meeting with principals and directors to look at capital projects. And basically that is what does the building need? What kind of renovations are we looking at? What would enhance that physical aspect of the building for their students? And so kind of a quick look at the calendar here. October through November is when the budget window opens. It says the 15th on here. We've moved it back to the 22nd so that we can make sure that we get everything to the principals, in a timely manner. And then during that time, the superintendent, myself, the budget committee will sit down, take a look at where we're at, look at those budget goals, see if that's where we want to be for this year. If those 4 goals are great, if we want to tweak them, or change them as we go. And then we'll provide training to the administrators. We already met with all directors and principals last week and started with the training. And then I'll hold individual meetings with the executive directors or principals as we go. And I'll provide some follow-up with them if they need help. And so then we move into November, December, and that's when the buildings will hold their meetings. They'll meet with their teachers, with the people at the building level or the department level to really decide where they want to be, where they want to go, and how this can align to their goals. And then myself, the finance department, will continue to check in, pretty regularly, whether that's through individual meetings, via email, however it is, to provide the support we need to so that our directors and principals can be successful in this budget process. It can be pretty tedious, and we don't want to make that a burden on them. We want to make sure that they understand it, they understand how to tie it to their goals, and can build a budget. And then that budget window will close on December 3rd, and then we will input all of the budget requests and then have that out, ready to go, probably after winter break. And so then we're looking at January. In December and January, we always have meetings with our buildings and our departments, as well as our partner districts. And what we do when it's our buildings and our departments is our cabinet and executive leadership team will meet with our building principals or our department directors. They'll present to us their budget for the year, their budget request, and they'll walk us through how they got to that part of, I need this and I need this. I had this last year, but I don't need it this year because it doesn't match our goals. And that's really the cool thing about zero-based budgeting, is it really gives you permission to not use something. So if you ordered a curriculum program last year and didn't use it, it gives you permission to say, okay, let's take this money, not use this program we didn't use, but really get something that might work for the kids. And so we'll do that. We'll meet with the directors in December, in January. When we meet with our partner districts, this is pretty cool, we invite their leadership team as well. So their superintendent, their CFO will sit in, as well as a district liaison, so that they know what's going on as well. And then we'll provide, they do this by PowerPoint, we're going to provide a new PowerPoint this year. And basically last year it started out with the data, the district, students moving in, students moving out, scores, different things like that, and then they got to the budget. What we really like to do to tie it into the zero-based budgeting, start with the budget request, and then have them look at data to support what they requested. And so we'll do that through January, and then February through June, in February, we'll hold a budget workshop for the Board of Education. In March, we'll have one with the Governing Council. And then I'll keep checking with the directors, the principals throughout the spring in case something comes up. What we found last year is that there wasn't a really good avenue for principals to advocate once that budget was set in January. And so I'm going to check in with them to see if, 3 things change. Maybe they know this is going to change, but they didn't know it in December. So we'll check in on that way. If we need to change it, we can. Preliminary budget has to be approved by us by June 30th, according to state statute. And so we'll bring that to the board in May, and then we'll bring that to the Governing Council in June. And so then that brings us to centralized purchasing. This is something we started last year. And we started it for the reasons that you see on your sheet here. We wanted to provide equity and resources across the district. What we found is some places were really utilizing certain curriculum supports where others weren't. But what the districts that were using them really well and getting good results. So we wanted to make sure that equity piece was there. And the other was, we really wanted access to discounts. We found out that we were buying a lot of books or a lot of computers, but we were buying them individually. So like at the building level or the district level. And so by putting them all into one, we've already received, and we've seen it this year, free teachers' books, different supports, different things that really, because we purchased in bulk, we were able to save money that put money back into the line items for our buildings so that they can get more things for our kids. So that has really gone well. And so you'll see on the next sheet, and that's page 20, you'll see 4 blue circles. This was put together by Dr. Bolton. Basically, how she did this with her curriculum team was she worked with the vendors that we frequently purchase items from to get pricing and discounts. And then she sent something out to the administrators that said, please send back in what you would need, how many books you would need, how many subscriptions. And then she took a look at that. The directors would stay within that budget that they had set. Dr. Bolton and her team would order all that, and then the savings, like I just said, would be passed on back into the directors or the principal's budgets, which was great. And so then you'll see on page 21, again, the process. We're going to do this for technology and instruction. Instruction, Dr. Bolton's group started last spring with the technology. We are going to do that this year. We're looking at inventories of hardware and software. We're going to put together a purchasing cycle so that schools are readily upgraded, every 5 years, every 6 years, whatever that is, and that there aren't buildings that are missed. So we're going to look at that. We're going to identify the budget cycle with that. We might even look into leasing computers, which would make it even more advantageous on a purchasing side, as well as an upgrade schedule. So that will help our buildings. Again, instruction did this last spring, which was great. We've had a couple of meetings, we've already made some tweaks to make the process even better for our schools and for our partner districts. And so then staffing, we look at this every year. We'll look through this from October through January. Doug, I think you can go one more. Thank you. We'll monitor caseloads. Alan Weeds put together a great spreadsheet that shows the caseload by teacher. And so we'll use the numbers on this sheet here just kind of as a guideline. We know that sometimes we'll look at 10 to 1. And if 10 to 1, if there's a ratio lower than 10 to 1, we just really want to find out why. Because either it's a very intense caseload and it's absolutely needed, or maybe we're not utilizing staff correctly and we can readjust at that point. So we'll look at the 10 to 1 for maybe reducing staff. We'll look at 17 to 1 for potentially adding staff. But either way, if we get to either of those numbers, we will reach out to the director, the coordinator, the principal, to really get an understanding of what that looks like prior to making any decisions. And then we'll monitor vacancies throughout the year as we go. And that leads me to the last slide. Be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
I have one. On what you were just talking about, the 10 to 1, is that 10 students to the teacher or 10 students to an adult in the room?
In that case, it'd be 10 students to the teacher because we're still looking at caseloads. What we're going to look at is paras as well, and then we'll kind of see what an individual classroom looks like.
Yeah, I'm picturing 10 of my sons and over one teacher, and that's a lot of Tommies in a room. And yeah, 17 is even really,
They do vary based on the level of services. So when you have a setting 4 or setting 3 where the teacher has students most of the day and they have pairs, that's a different configuration. That 10 to 17 is more for those resource teachers that have multiple, that their students are more gen ed and that they're supporting them. But when you look at the different levels of supports, when you have more self-contained classrooms, you look at those classrooms.
Okay.
And you will have lower caseloads because a lot of our SSD schools, our classrooms, and even in the partner districts, that 10 is a lot of kids in that one classroom. So we have to definitely look for safety, and it's also for management and support for the students.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like, the carpentry classes or whatnot.
Yeah, it's for the larger group of students,
Okay.
but those other classrooms are looked at separately.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's what I need to hear. Thank you. Okay. Anyone else?
I do. On the heels of our equity plan presentation and thinking about what the slide you mentioned about our distressed communities, I'm wondering, can you walk us through how special spending requests in, for instance, a tier 3 type scenario, where for a few schools there might be a conversation or two where it's disclosed that we have a real need for more staffing or spending somehow. What does that decision-making process look like in the past? And I see your language here to develop a framework to support those schools. Do you imagine it changing? So what has it been? Who's involved? Whose eyes see that? And who takes part in that decision-making? And what will it look like in the future?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, because that's kind of where we were with the changing of the PowerPoint. And so what we found a lot of times is those requests would get buried in data, and it would never be really straightforward. So in the past, it was just a general justification of, we really think we need this, or we feel that we need another staff member here. What we're looking at is really basing it on data, and then looking at what tier they fall in. So is it tier 1, is it everybody, is it tier 2 distro, or is it that few that we really look at with the distressed community index? And then what that does is we then, after Keenan, myself, the cabinet, will sit and talk to the partner district, look at their data, and then really make a decision based on their needs, what that data supports. But that'll all be in that budget process of when we start to meet with the districts, the partner districts of the buildings.
So, Director Mueller, there's 8 districts that are in that category of that top tier. So they're still receiving, let's draw Normandy, for instance. Normandy still receive the same look of caseloads and looking at services for those kids, special ed supports are there. Tier 2 is that gets disproportionality funds. So when we work with them, and I would say Chiquita McGriddle and Tammy Gates and their director of special ed works with their administration. We met with them last spring on Zoom to really identify how do they utilize disproportionality funds, because those really should be used for not special ed students, but for what can you do to help support students from going into special ed. And they looked at it in instructional. They were looking at social emotional support, so social worker support, and they wanted those pieces with their plan. The top tier, they were also Normandy's in that top tier. So when we met with them, they also asked for, looking in terms of the initiatives around their general ed instruction. They were looking at a new math curriculum, a new reading curriculum, and so providing them with funds to provide a instructional coach in their schools to help support them that way. Also to look at a coordinator to help support some of those pieces where they would, if we just look at it overall, they wouldn't have needed that overall coordinator, but they requested it because of all these significant changes that they were doing for their gen ed pieces to help support students in special ed. So that's how we looked at those districts differently than we would if you're in those darker blues or those other ones. That's an example.
So it sounds like you do have a working framework.
Yeah.
But the language about developing a new one, or is it not?
So it's just going to continue that conversation. So the framework for them is what are you guys looking at? What are your needs? What are your initiatives? How can we help support you? And it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think when I first came here, that was the one thing that most of the partner districts were frustrated with, was they felt like there was this one-size-fits-all to all, and for all the districts. And there is that part of it, but it's also, we are taking in those unique characteristics and saying, what are your goals, what are your initiatives, how can we help support those initiatives? Caseloads is another one that really likes the social emotional learning pieces of it. Fergus, of course, in the same way. So really matching what they're wanting to help, and how can we be a value add to them, and looking at how it can benefit the special ed students in each one of those districts. So to me, it's looking at that framework to see how it works with those districts and to see, do we need to adjust anything that we did start last year? Yeah.
No other questions. I have a quick on both the budget process and on the equity plan. It was brought up where trauma became an issue in both of those. Would it be possible if one of the work studies to bring us up to date on what we're doing with trauma and how it's being integrated in? And I keep hearing that word being tossed. I'd like to know specifically what we're doing. Any other board member like to hear about that?
Sure.
Okay.
And I'd just like to say I'm greatly encouraged in reference to the leadership that you're showing in this situation. Thank you, Dr. Keenan, for your selection in him and being a person to be able to be a part of that process, of this particular process, and within the capabilities. I know that when we spoke a moment ago about the level of learning experiences individuals have, I know that Mr. Hogg has had those experiences. And so I'm encouraged greatly that he's part of that. And I'm glad that I've asked the question to us as a board regarding how special do we really want to be. And so to me, this begins to be one of those areas of uniqueness, and we have the capabilities to bring into our community. And so I'm thankful for that. Thank you very much. And thank you, Mr. Hogg.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, for our final presentation for tonight, 2.03, vaccine mandate.
All right, so this has been kind of rolling out slowly over the last couple months. I wanted to have Ms. McBriddle, Ms. Mitchell, and Mr. Leach update you on how we're navigating the ever-changing mandates and vaccines, distance here. And the big thing around this presentation is to focus in on how our policy, we're doing as a policy is different from other districts, and how we're managing in the partner districts to support our staff where a district does say that they're mandating vaccines for all of their staff, including SSD. So they're going to update you.
Good evening, Vice President Pepper, Board Directors Dr. Keenan, and members of our community. I'm Chiquita McBriddle, the Executive Director of Partner District, and I also have a few partners with me tonight that will be presenting.
Alan Weed, Executive Director of Student Support Services.
Erica Mitchell, Director of Health Services. And tonight we will provide you with an update with regards to vaccine mandates in our partner districts. And so SSD, of course, we believe that vaccination, next slide, I'm sorry. The vaccinations of our staff will provide students and staff with protection against severe illness from COVID-19. And at this time, we do know that boards throughout the county, they were working to develop plans to address providing safe school environments for both students as well as staff. And we know that our staff must also comply with those expectations in those partner districts. Currently, we know that 3 districts in the county, they have developed policies to mandate weekly testing and/or vaccination of staff, although some staff may be exempt to these policies at the same time. They may not be able to provide that documentation because they are exempt, and there are some who have not made the decision to receive the vaccination. And so we want to ensure that we're addressing the impact of COVID-19, the vaccination of staff, as well as the staff who have made the decision at this point not to be vaccinated. We want to ensure that there are resources available to support our staff, to ensure that we're able to continue providing services throughout St. Louis County. To date, of course, I've shared with you that 3 of our partner districts have made those decisions and they have mandates in place. They are Ferguson, Florissant, Hazelwood School District, as well as University City. You have before you data points for each of those partner districts. Alan Weeks has developed a system to support us with being able to work with leadership here to monitor our staff in those districts and staff who have completed the vaccination process and those who have not. We do know that in Ferguson, Florissant, we have about 86% of our staff that are fully vaccinated, and we have about 39 who we have not yet received information for, and we have 10 that are exempt. In Hazelwood, 429, we have 67 staff who have not shared that information with us, and 8 are exempt. And then we have University City, 79 staff are fully vaccinated, 18 have not shared that information, and 3 are exempt. And so with these partner districts, we're working to ensure that we can also, again, identify resources to support them. And so we will allow Alan Weeks to share with us our status of some of our other surrounding studies.
This information details for you each district and how many of full-time staff that are assigned to those districts have provided us with their vaccine details. So simply not having provided it doesn't mean that they are not vaccinated. They may not have shared the card with us. We've done multiple collaborations with communications department to specifically reach out to those who have not yet shared. And I think we've done 3 separate efforts to do that. So at this point, countywide, in our permanent school-based sites, there are 83.1% of our staff that are fully vaccinated. And that 868 that have not yet shared those details with us. So as districts revise their policies, we have the information and the specifics to allow our leadership in each partner district to correctly and fully liaise with the partner district leadership in order to make sure that in the event that a testing mandate is implemented in additional districts, we'll know who needs to be communicated with to provide that information to the partner district to reinforce their board decision. And this information is being collected on an ongoing basis. Next slide. So we've, in order to address the specifics of need in the event that policies take us towards universal testing for anyone who is not vaccinated or documented to be vaccinated, we're establishing relationships with organizations to assist us with that. In many cases, and currently in each of the 3 districts that have the mandate in place or pending, there are relationships with organizations that are present. So our staff, say, in Hazelwood, are allowed to participate in Hazelwood's own testing protocol. But knowing that as districts come on board, we may have a time lag. So we've established some relationships to assist us in making sure that our staff has access to testing. So Ms. McRiddle utilized a connection with BJC in order to create some opportunity for our staff to test at BJC hospital campuses. That is using a nasal swab PCR test. Some staff feel strongly that they wanted additional options, meaning the saliva test. And so we additionally have a relationship with AIM Laboratories that we're exploring creating the contract for, so that we could administer at our own sites, where staff could come and do a simple spit test and get a result in 12 to 24 hours. And all of that, we're going to be feeding that information back into partner districts so that they can have confidence that our staff will be compliant with their policies. And as those situations come up, we'll be creating communication out to all staff to tell them what the options are. Anyone have any questions?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I can get your numbers, Dan. Focus on your partnerships. 259.86%, and started their vaccination, 10 are exempt. That gives me 268. But I got out of 259, so my numbers don't. Anything happens with Caseloads?
Yeah, I believe the exempt, the staff who are exempt, so they're not, they have acknowledged their status with us. We just don't have record of their card. So we need to maintain awareness of those, of the whole staff that would need to, submit testing. And so
The 10 are exempt, may or may not have provided a vaccination card?
the 10 who are exempt have not, but they have declared status, which the district has accepted,
Okay.
which means we won't, that we cannot compel them.
So why wouldn't that add up total to 259?
So, yeah, I could have made an error on that. I'll have to check my
I mean,
numbers.
I've got an error on each one. I mean, the numbers don't add up.
Yeah, I think there was a 2 staff variants, but I thought those were resignations. I'll double check them.
Okay, it's just that none of the numbers added up, that's why I didn't understand.
I think it's that the first number, maybe, was not
Yeah,
updated. But the information as far as the percentages, I actually checked those today, so I know that the numbers are correct. I think it's probably your overall number that we need to go back and review.
Yeah, I'll revise those and.
Yeah, I was just wondering, the numbers just didn't add up on any of the 3. Numbers are.
The percentages are
Right.
Did you have any other questions? Okay.
Just a couple, on the, processes that you're setting up for testing of the employees, can you just explain to me how that works? If employees, for example, are being tested weekly, does that happen the week before? Or does that take away from their time in the classroom because they're awaiting test results?
So the response to that is twofold. First, the partner districts, several of them have identified resources for their staff as well as SSD staff working in their districts to tap into. Those resources are available for them outside of the workday. As we are working to partner with BJC Christian Hospital as well as Ames Lab, we're looking for opportunities, again, outside of the workday to ensure that we're not interrupting services, but we're also looking to see if there are possibilities for them to go on their lunch period or to some extent have that available to them as close as possible to their school sites. And that was our purpose of making that connection with BJC specifically for the Hazelwood School District. That was our district with the largest impact, and we wanted to ensure that we were responding to the needs of our staff and providing those opportunities. But we know, of course, that we can't interrupt the service delivery that we provide to our students, but we also wanted to ensure that as easy as possible, we would have some resources available in addition to those resources that our partner districts are providing.
I think part of my question though was, as they're being tested weekly and they're waiting for the results, are they being kept out of the classroom while they're waiting on those results? Because I know just on the BJC side, that nasal PCR, it can take 24, 36, or 48 hours.
Right.
And there doesn't seem to be a rhyme or reason to the turnaround time.
Yes, it's a little different in each district. So some districts are saying that they have to have documentation within the last 7 days by Monday of each day.
Right.
Of each week rather, and that, you know, and so they have a procedure for their staff, which our staff would comply with on the nature of,
A delayed submission, for the most part, is what they are providing to ensure that in instances, as you've expressed, that they will be able to provide that documentation if there is a delay in receiving.
And I think my second question is, I feel like I ask this every time we talk about COVID vaccinations, is how's their staff doing with it? How are they responding to this policy? How do they feel about it? How are they doing?
so, I think there are staff that have expressed some, significant apprehension to the nasal PCR swab, and prefer a saliva test. I don't know if we can probably get some information about some of the more formal information that's coming from staff, from perhaps HR through the exemption process. in general, I think people realize that it is in everyone's interest for there to be a greater degree of protection and/or awareness for those that can't or choose not to be vaccinated. So generally, I think the testing hasn't generated a substantial amount of negative emotion from staff yet.
I had a question about, for those three districts, have we seen a rush of people who now that they have to have, not they have, it's either submit the weekly test or get, like, okay, give me 30 days, I'll get the 2 in, or by now, if they haven't gotten it, they're not getting it. Or you guys not know?
I don't think we know well.
Okay.
You know, like I said, we've done 3 separate strategic efforts to communicate with those who have not supplied a vaccine card to us. That communication isn't demanding that they be vaccinated. It is simply asking them to clarify their status. In general, I did see an inrush of new documentation each time that we did that. And it's been a slow trickle since, so 10 to 20 per day.
I would say over the last week and a half or 2 weeks, our numbers specifically for Hazelwood, I think we were at about 140, and we're now at 67. And so the numbers are dropping.
There have been a substantial improvement.
And some people are getting the first dose, and so they don't have a full vaccine first, so we know that that's happening. So it's a trickle in. But, you know, we do get responses back from them, like, I don't plan to get one. So please stop letting me know that I need to.
Any other questions?
Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, that ends our
Back to the
presentation. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second. Thank you.
all in favor?
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.